Welcome to The Vital Connection, where we are committed to doing ministry together. Our goal is to strengthen your connection to other church leaders and equip you for more effective ministry in the work of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Now here are your hosts from the Dakotas Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome to the Vital Connections. I'm Sherry Meister. I'm the director of the Dakotas United Methodist Foundation.
And I'm Rebecca Trefz, the director of ministries for the Dakotas Conference. And Sherry, we have quite an episode today, don't we?
Oh, yes, we do.
We do have a really fun episode today. Jeff Pospisil, our director of finance and administration, sat down to visit with Steve Trefz and Taryn Ragles from Fusion Church. And they have kind of a unique setup in terms of how they do ministry and leadership, and some stories and some laughs to share about that unexpected journey. So have a listen.
All right. Welcome to this episode of The Vital Connection. And I'm Jeff Pospisil, the conference treasurer, and I'm with Steve Trefz of Fusion and Taryn Ragles of Fusion. So welcome. So
thank you for having us, Jeff Pospisil.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the theme of this episode was, what is it like to have a quarter-time clergy in a full-time appointment, and how does that work? It's a unique appointment, and I think a lot of people will find it interesting, and I think there's going to be more applicable to others in ministry than you might think at first. First of all, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself, what you'd want the listeners to know about you? I'll start with you, Steve.
Yeah, my name is Steve Trefz. I'm ordained United Methodist elder since 2008. My first parish after I graduated from Garrett Evangelical was Grace United Methodist in Piedmont. I served there 3 years and was on family leave as a stay-at-home dad for 10 years. During that time, I worked on my Doctor of Ministry, also at Garrett Evangelical, and have since kind of combined various stay-at-home and part-time teaching occupations through Sioux Falls Seminary and Garrett Evangelical in the course of study, of the denomination. Yeah. And currently we live in Mitchell because my wife Rebecca was appointed here as our director of ministries in the conference office. So that's what brought us to Dakota Wesleyan, to Mitchell. And when we moved here 4.5 years ago, I started playing bass guitar at Fusion Church because they asked me to. And so that's kind of how we got started going to Fusion.
Cool. What about you, Taryn? What would you want to share?
My name is Taryn Ragles, and I'm originally from Mitchell, and we moved back about 1.5 years ago. This is the second church that I worked in. The first church that I worked in was Grace Point Wesleyan Church in Brookings, and now I'm here at Fusion, and I'm also getting my Master's of Divinity online through Wesley Seminary in Marion, Indiana.
Very cool. So, well, first of all, I guess, Steve, this is an unusual appointment, and the rumor was that you actually had volunteered for something like this or offered it up. Is that true?
Yeah.
So what made you think that this would work, to be a part-timer in a church of worshiping? What are you worshiping now?
Oh, it's a very good question.
You guys want to do your vital signs, you might know.
I would say we've solidly been worshiping around the 184-ish mark this January, February.
180.
That range. So to back up a step, I was serving as Matt Morrison's faculty mentor through the Kairos Project at Sioux Falls Seminary, and so he was my pastor and I was his professor, and it was kind of a unique relationship to start with when he was here for his 2 years. And when it was kind of decided that he was going to move over to Sioux Falls Asbury to utilize his gifts with that ministry, and Fusion was kind of asking the questions, where's our next pastoral leadership going to come from? as it was planted by Brandon Vetter when he was a campus pastor here, and then he served full time and then moved to Bismarck. One of the questions was gnawing at me since I left parish ministry in 2008 to be a stay-at-home dad was, okay, what part of that call still exists? Yeah. And, kind of that being at church, at Fusion every Sunday anyway as part of the worship team and helping out wherever we could as a family was already a part of it. And Fusion's also unique in that we have several active ordained clergy with Joel Allen, Eric Van Meter, Denise Van Meter, myself, Rebecca, my wife, and other professors and presidents and leaders that it was just, the question arose for me, I know I can't do this full time, but is there a way where we can team lead this church differently? Knowing that at a place like Fusion that meets on a college campus, and college ministry and young adult ministry being a key goal for us, knowing that offering was always going to be a little bit more on the lower end of sustaining, how could we be flexible with our kind of volunteer offering of time? Yeah. And so, it actually started, most people don't know this, but the conversation started at the Mitchell Lake, known for its water quality and delicious fish.
So you guys are drinking the water and all of a sudden an idea came to you?
Pretty much. Eric Van Meter met me out on the lake at about 7 a.m. one random day when all the questioning was kind of going around, the discernment about where we were going to go next with the ministry of Fusion. And he flat out asked if I was going to be his pastor, and I said I would not wish that on anyone, but that's not to say it hasn't crossed my mind that we all are part of something going on here. And so also part of that was knowing that someone was going to have to wake up in the morning and have the vision of Fusion be their priority. Yeah. And so that's how we presented it to the lead team at the time. And they had a lot of conversations. We had conversations with our district superintendent, Roger, and just kind of some more discernment as a team that we're willing to see where this goes and if God's behind this and where it leads.
Just a kind of a question. Was it easier to transition into this pastoral role being that you served there for is it 3 years you served as a bass guitarist / whatever? Yeah, you were part of the church for 3 years
and I had
beforehand.
Preached occasionally to fill in and help out in other pieces too. And I think it was unique because what made it easier was also what made it more difficult, because as Matt's faculty mentor, I was privy to a lot of what he was trying to do in leadership, what was succeeding, what was tough. So the cultural dynamics and the contextual dynamics of the congregation, what makes it unique as Fusion, I had a perspective on. But I also, I think in all the ministry things that I try, the more perspective I bring into something, the more that can kind of shadow how I see new possibilities as well, or it kind of changes the coloring of the landscape. So in many ways it was a huge plus. I think it helped a lot that people knew me or were familiar with me to that extent. I'm not sure they would have trusted this scenario if that hadn't been the case, because it was so different than
Taryn, how did you get involved? I mean, because you came right from college to...
No, I graduated from SDSU in December of 2015 and took a job at Grace Point Wesleyan Church. I was a ministry assistant there. So I helped a couple... Grace Point is a very large church, so I helped a couple pastors with different ministry areas. Particularly, I worked with the college pastor and with the community life pastor, which did small groups, local outreach, and global outreach. So those were kind of the fields that I spent the most amount of time in. Steve and I had crossed paths one summer in college when I was home leading worship for Fusion for a summer when I needed an interim worship leader. And that was actually the summer that Steve had started playing bass, and so we had crossed paths on the worship team. and he had texted me, gotten a hold of me, and asked to meet the next time I was in town. So my husband and I were home over Easter and met with Steve, and he kind of presented us with this opportunity, and I guess that was that. We prayed about it and thought about it, and but really just felt God leading us here, and so we accepted and moved that summer.
I don't remember that was that part as much as I remember a long discernment trying to figure out.
3 weeks, is that long?
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah.
It was a long.
Well, you talked to us over Easter weekend, and we accepted mid-May.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it wasn't that long.
It seems like a long time when you're...
We thought about it for a week, came and interviewed the week later, accepted the job the next week. It was pretty quick.
That is cool. So what were your concerns going into this? I mean, all of a sudden you're going from serving a very large church, multiple pastors, to now serving a church with a quarter-time pastor who has been taking a vacation for 10 years. So,
very clear.
Not real. But who's been out of the pulpit for 10 years.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's unique about my situation as well is my family has been attending Fusion from the very beginning, and I've been a part of the congregation in the summers when I was home for college, and that because of that, I knew quite a bit about the congregation. It felt like I talked to my parents about what was going on a lot, or it would come up in conversation what was going on in the church. I saw it in the summers when I was home. I knew a lot of the people that attended, and so going in, I felt like I had a little bit of an idea of what I was getting myself into, both the good and the bad, so that was a little bit of a concern for me, just kind of knowing some of the things that Fusion was going through. I was nervous about moving. I'm just to give you an example of the size, I was moving from a church that had 32 small groups to a church that had 2 small groups.
Yeah.
And so it's a big size difference.
Yeah.
And I knew that would be different. As far as the structure and the setup of a quarter-time pastor, and me being full-time, I had one concern that I had was that would be a lonely endeavor, being the only full-time staff member in the office day in, day out. Mm-hmm. Also, I'm pretty young. I'm 25. I was 23 when I took this job, and or maybe I was 24. I think I was 24. Anyway, I was, I'd only worked in one church for a year and a half, and I was just concerned that I didn't know enough. I was being asked, that's a lot of responsibility and leadership to be asked to do with a very small amount of experience.
So Steve told you the secret: you make it up as you go, but you speak confidently.
That didn't always work at the beginning. That wasn't even a good strat. I think the key thing I would add to the narrative is, the folks within the lead team too that suggested Taryn, just based on her character and what she did and led around here. Yeah. And I think the conversation that kept coming up over and over and over was, skills can be learned, strategies can be understood and trained, but to carry a vision, the character was the most important piece. Yep. And so inevitably, hopefully, those of us could surround her with our gifts and skills to do that, and I think that was why it was, age and experience weren't the biggest factors in how we were planning.
You bring up the lead team. I mean, So did they immediately, I mean, how did that work? Did the lead team immediately grab onto this? Were they...
No, it took a few meetings. I mean, in many ways, we're still grabbing onto this. We spent the last year, because part of what came with our first 6 months was a lot of just working out the kinks of who was doing what and how many part-time staff do we have at the time, it seemed like, and then some of that was in transition and just trying to get a hold of what has been the mission and vision. Where are things headed, and how do we fit into that, and where can we steer that, and where do we feel God calling us? This last year has been trying to reconfigure lead team a little more concisely around a one board model.
Yeah.
Instead of kind of a hybrid between a one board and your traditional main committees. And that had some very high moments and some very low moments last year. Where just got things figured out, and then all of a sudden we'd realize, no, I mean, we're still at square one trying to figure out how this works with the rest of our lay leadership too, and what happens when, some of the pieces that we were really planning on for one reason or another just didn't work out in the timeline and the goals we had in mind. Okay. I feel pretty encouraged heading into this year that we're... especially how Taryn's taking some ownership and leadership of the lead team in that regard, that things are aiming in the right direction again. But yeah, I think as far as the initial buy-in to the quarter-time appointment, and as countercultural as that felt, it took 2 or 3 conversations as a full team with some other community members from D-Dub and the church.
What was the main hesitation? Main concern that you would say?
We're bigger than this, or this is not how churches work.
It's not how churches work. We're taking a step back.
Yeah, it's just tough to trust something you don't. And I talk out loud a lot, and not always the things that are exactly where it's going to end up being, Yeah. And so if you wanted a clear vision of this is how it's going to work and this is when this is going to happen at these points and this person's going to do this, that was not part of the vision that I had. Yeah. And so that's why it took an insane amount of trust on their part to say, all right, we feel God is calling us to try this out for this season.
So going into this, I mean, you had certain expectations of what it would play out like. I mean, I would guess you knew you'd be preaching X number of times, you'd be doing some meetings, and Taryn, you'd be doing more of the day-to-day stuff and making sure the volunteers are organized. I don't know what all goes. I guess I don't even know what goes into your position. It's a different position.
Yeah. Originally, the very first job description I got was more of like a discipleship pastor type role, a lot of developing leaders, developing discipleship programs or things that would help develop disciples, as well as training new volunteers, reaching out to first-time attenders, and helping people to get plugged in at Fusion. In reality, once we got going in this role, it was apparent that it's much more administrative. It's much more just making sure that everything is rolling and everyone has what they need, and just trying to help the leaders in the different ministry areas do their job the best that they can, whether that's a paid position or a volunteer position. Yeah. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, connecting with the key leaders in areas, just kind of making sure that all the details of things are organized and put together and communicated well. And also, as Steve mentioned, I've been working pretty heavily with the lead team and trying to do some strategy and helping to structure them in a way that helps them to succeed and grow as leaders. another part of what I do is I am kind of that relationship between Dakota Wesleyan. So about 5 hours of my job a week is connecting with campus ministry and Dakota Wesleyan in some way. So that includes attending chapel. I advise a leadership team on it's called the Student Ministry Council. So I advise one of the 6 teams that they have on the Student Ministry Council, and in charge of those 5 students, and just kind of try to make sure that we are connecting with Dakota Wesleyan students well, and that we understand the heart of the campus, because we are on Dakota Wesleyan's campus, and that is a big part of our mission, to make sure that someone's connecting there.
That's cool. So how about you, Steve? How did it change? How did your expectations change or be fulfilled going into this?
I had certain expectations that some of the answers would become clear very quickly, because that's how we were operating getting into the situation in the first place. Like, we knew God was going to provide this far, and what I needed to wrestle with, and Taryn's one of the biggest champions of me wrestling with this. One of the reasons I left parish ministry and went on family leave, it was to be a stay-at-home dad, knowing that being dual pastors as a family was not necessarily working for our relationship that great. Yeah. But the other reason really was I had not figured out how to set boundaries around what does a pastor do. In a sea of infinite possibilities for what a pastor's job could be, how do I make my time what it exactly needs to be for the mission of the congregation that I'm entrusted to serve? And so part of my hesitancy in building expectations, I guess, was, I've learned, I'm 10 years away from this, I have a doctorate now, I mentor other pastors, so I got this. Yeah. And just realizing that whether it was quarter time, half time, double time, the minute my name became next to an appointment list, I was immediately fighting those same demons in a sense of, how can I say no? How can they want a pastor to be this. Well, maybe they're right. Yeah. And so Taryn's been helpful, as has, of course, coworkers and peers and family, in saying, you're really good at that. You have great conversations with these random people. Is that the best use of your 10 hours? Yeah. Is that Steve time or is that Fusion time? Like, how is your time aimed towards the mission and vision, which is exciting for me. That's, the thing that I trust Taryn with completely is the keeping that mission and vision. So that was one of the things I expected that part of it to be easier. I hoped it was easier, but it's still a struggle. But I think many of people in ministry face this. You get into it and you end up sacrificing your family and your own personal health and own mental health to do this, and then that you would never tell anybody else to do that. You never tell a volunteer, hey, why don't you spend more time at the education committee meetings and forget about your kids' dance recitals? Would you ever do that? So never. Right. So Taryn, how you knew that you were aware of this coming in, that Steve has a tendency to go. I'm not sure of all the things we made clear to her at that. Go ahead. What were you aware of, as you said?
What's the question?
When you saw, Steve is a quarter time. How have you stepped in there to try to make sure it doesn't slip into half-time and three-quarter time and full-time, and that, I saw that as part of a key part of your role, is that maybe that's not fair, but to protect one of the leaders in a way. And
at the beginning, I tried to protect him just by not emailing or calling or texting or just like leaving all of those things for a meeting, for a time to talk where I we've already had this set, we can protect this. To a certain extent, I think that's positive, I think I've also learned that I am not necessarily his keeper.
Yep.
And so I have to, now maybe I would make the decision to send an email versus call or text, and just have to trust that he's going to hold himself to his boundaries of when or when not to respond to the email. And that's kind of up to him, honestly. I think that this is a difficult question because there is just something about being an appointed pastor that makes people feel like you're the one to go to. So it doesn't really seem to matter how many times in some situations we say, go to Taryn for this, go to Taryn for this.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if I'm the one sending the email with the information, they will go to Steve with the questions.
Yeah.
And so there is only so much you can do. You just have to keep trying. And I think, like, on Steve's part, he has to hold that boundary and say, no, that's Taryn's thing. I don't know. Go talk to Taryn about it. I'm not a part of that conversation. Mm-hmm. Between Steve and I, it takes a lot of trust that it doesn't work if you don't trust the other person, because you will end up spending a lot of time attempting to make sure that what they're doing is what you want or what you're okay with. So he's had to really trust me to say, okay, take that thing, and whether or not it's how I would do it, I am trusting you to lead that thing and to just do it, because I don't have 40 hours a week to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I do that much of protecting him. I think the biggest thing that's been helpful is just being willing to trust me to run with something. As I've gotten a little more confident over the last year and a half, I've learned to trust myself to just run with something and not necessarily have to run every decision by him as well.
That's interesting, because just being a really good co-worker in ministry probably helps. So I would have never thought about that, but that's...
Well, another thing that's unique, and for maybe the vast majority of folks who are actually listening to this, I didn't realize until maybe a couple months into working with Taryn and the rest of the staff that I hadn't really served a church with staff before. More than one or two people that were part-time. So... I mean, that's the other unique thing about Fusion is we immediately tried something new with a congregation right at the verge of the most difficult systems change size-wise.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in that uncomfortable 144 to 200 zone where it just can't be the family-style church that most folks have as a background, but not all the folks, half and half. And so how do you be something new at a time when something new is needed, without a whole lot of roadmaps that are easy fits?
Yep. So you don't have a game plan going forward, or just making it up as you go?
I have a quarter of a game plan.
Quarter of a game plan.
Anyone who knows me knows that I like game plans. It's killing me not to have one.
Yeah.
So, like, you guys are getting close to the 200 barrier, which is a big thing. I mean, what needs to happen for this? Is this model going to take you to over the 200 barrier, or is there something that needs to be tweaked, or what? I mean, we're not all about numbers, but I like numbers. So
they're a part of how people connect.
Well, they're part of judging a little bit how you are engaging people for the cause of Christ. So,
I think part of what we have been working through with lead team is what is the role of future staffing. Like right now we have how many, you said?
We have 8 part-time staff apart from Steve and I.
Okay, wow.
And so...
How many FTE, full-time equivalents, when you add it all together? Is it 2?
I could do the math quick.
Do the math quick.
Are they all quarter time? Because then I could do the math.
No. And so part of our discussion is, at what point are 3 fuller time more effective in the next season than, or is it add 10 more part-timers and figure out a supervisory role?
Yeah.
Or, because we have a lot of part-timers who aren't paid too, our elders that I talked about before.
Yeah.
Whether it's through children's church curriculum or preaching and care or college connections, community connections. We have all these folks serving in their gifted areas, but it's not always. I think one of the tough things at this point in the journey is consistency. And one of the things we see in our particular setting is consistency of schedules is very month to month, and especially semester to semester.
Yeah.
It's just not a typical church because of our location on campus. We don't have a building.
Yeah.
We meet to worship on Sunday mornings and kind of have that one or two rooms for that time. But then otherwise, we're trying to be church where we are, and that's a whole nother system to start in a different way. So how's that full-time equivalence working over there?
I'm almost done. You distracted me.
We got the calculator out.
We have between the 8 employees, about 55 hours worth of work.
So 1.25, almost 1.5. So you're basically at 2 3/4 FTE for a church almost of 200 in attendance. Interesting.
Well, and one of the interesting things about our attendance too is, like many places, it's your group that's there every week, your group that's there every quarter. I think we figured out roughly, tossing out the folks who come once or twice because they're visiting campus or their kids or grandkids. We're in that 450 to 550 Fusionites is what we say.
Is the number of Fusionites. Okay. Huh.
And so,
That's cool. Now, there's a number of churches that are going to a part-time pastor, and they're trying different models. I mean, let's just say you have another church that wants to try doing this. I mean, what 2 or 3 pieces of advice would you give somebody that wants to try doing something similar?
For those of you who cannot see what's happening behind the scenes, Steve and I are fighting over who should talk first. I have a lot of advice for what I do, but I think probably the key thing would be that once you create a plan, stick to it. Obviously make adjustments where needed, where things aren't working or whatever, but don't ditch the plan. Stick with the plan and communicate it clearly and repeatedly. Yeah. If you think you've communicated enough, you probably haven't, so communicate it some more. Everyone has to be on board for this to work. Your board has to be on board. Your staff has to be on board. Your congregation has to be on board. The pastors that are engaging in this together have to be on board. And so if you're not communicating with each other clearly, you're going to come to a place where there's going to be something that isn't working because you haven't communicated.
I mean, that just fits in right with the trust we were talking about before. Once you start adjusting your plan because of, let's just say, a complaint or whatever it is that happens, all of a sudden, the people that we're trusting in your vision say maybe they don't know what's going on. The people and other people, interesting.
And I think that it's really important that the especially the staff that's engaging in this most directly, so in our case, Steve and I, we meet weekly, actually twice a week, because that's just what we found that we needed. But I think you have to have consistent communication, what is happening, and just to be able to make sure that you are on the same page.
That was helpful too. One of the rhythms we figured out about 9 months in, maybe it was a year in. When did we figure that out? Last semester. There was a frustration where I like to think about lots of things and get it all out there and kind of let it all absorb, whereas Taryn's trying to actually, because I don't have any actual functions that need to happen in my part of the pie. Yeah. But whereas Taryn's like, we need answers on this. We need to get these plans and out and communication and deal with these things. So we actually set it up where our first meeting of the week is philosophy and the next one's details. So that's helped us, I think. Keep going, keep visioning, so you don't lose the visioning, the active, real-time visioning piece, but you also are getting things done that builds trust. Like, it looks like we're competent. Yeah.
That's interesting, because, you talk about that. There's death by meeting. Trying to combine too many different types of meetings into one meeting ends up being a bad deal. But
I don't know about that. Yeah, that's my temptation every day. So,
but yeah, when you want to talk about details, when you're in the middle of more of a strategic, I would guess that's what you mean by philosophy, or is that what do you mean by that?
In philosophy meetings, it's a chance. I don't know. I'm just going to speak for Steve, I guess.
Go for it.
He's a verbal processor, and so philosophy meetings allow the what ifs. It's a lot of the what if we tried this? What would happen if we did this? Well, do you think it could work like this? And it's also like a good check-in. We debrief a little bit how the past service has gone. Okay. It's also a little bit of a personal check-in, how things are going for us personally. And then usually we can kind of say, okay, this is coming up. What do we need to try in this scenario? So it just kind of allows Steve to verbally process all the ideas that he has. In the other meeting, more of our details meeting, we do that later in the week, so it's kind of our check-in. Have we communicated with anyone who has a working part on Sunday? Yeah. Is everyone ready to go and they know what they need to know to make the Sunday service happen smoothly? And then with whatever time we have left in that meeting, we usually work on planning something else that is coming up, and that's more setting things in stone and getting things ready instead of just strategizing or brainstorming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. More tactical type of deal.
Mm-hmm. Something as simple as one of the things I do in both meetings is scroll through Taryn's emails to me that week to make sure. Like this week, there was something I completely missed 2 weeks ago, but she had a space to say, hey, haven't heard back from you on this, or did you get a chance to look at it? And because we had created a space for that, it didn't build up as much as it would have the first 6 months we were trying this together, I think. Mm-hmm. The other piece, to close, when you talk about what would you recommend, something that I think is important whenever you're trying something new, especially like this, is the sooner the better that you can just figure out who you're going to communicate with and why and how. I think early on we were doubling up on communication sometimes, which can confuse people. Or
who communicates ourselves. With who,
right?
Why?
And so even just because the reality is a change like this is not going to just happen in meetings. It needs to take lunches and coffees and groups and house visits, and so just working out together a strategy for that earlier rather than midstream.
Yeah. Now, you're going for your theological degree. So what does that mean for you? I mean, what's your goal with that?
I started this program while I was still attending or still employed at Grace Point Wesleyan. I was a ministerial student in the Wesleyan denomination there. And I started the program with the intent of someday becoming licensed and eventually ordained pastor. And so I picked a Wesleyan seminary and got to it. So I was about a year in when, not even, 8 months in when we took the position at Fusion. So basically in the process of discerning, I just kind of felt like the denominational differences aside, this is where God was calling us, and we would figure that out later. So I continued my education, just knowing that someday we will figure it out later, and at the end of this I'll have an MDiv, and this is a side note, I guess, but I think that is an advantage in this scenario. I don't think that people see me so much. I could be wrong, so correct me if you think I'm wrong, Steve, but I don't think that people see me so much as a lay leader as they do like a pastor in training.
Okay.
Because a lot of people do know I'm going to school for this, and so I'm not sure that they see me just as a lay leader, but more as someone who's young and gaining experience and that sort of thing.
I think depending on the perspective, I know there's some folks within the congregation, both younger and even older than you, who do see you as I think more of the New Testament elder. So not so much around the idea of ordination, but the idea of discipler, someone to walk alongside with. Yeah. Or kind of study under, walk beside, because you can see where their life is headed and being honest and open about their struggles from up front and beyond. So yeah, I think there's both. That some things I think folks will put up with Taryn because she's trying hard and she's doing her best and she's a student in training, when there's another group of people who are following along as disciples.
Okay.
Yeah, I do think that, the plus side is being a pastor in training, like Steve said, people kind of let me experiment a little bit, or, they're okay with me not exactly knowing the right steps because of that, because they know that I'm young and inexperienced. And that is a plus. It also gives me, being a pastor in training versus just a lay leader, gives me, I think, just a little bit more authority. Yeah. Per se, I guess. Just a little bit more trust, a little higher level of trust. But at the same time, it does. The flip side is that sometimes I am seen as young and that I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Honestly, that fits right in with I would guess when you went to Grace, people saw you as young and didn't know what you were doing, and they would train you up to be a pastor. I don't know what percent of the population would have been like that, but I bet you a number of them. So that's actually a normal experience for a young pastor. So,
yeah.
Would you call yourself a pastor? Do people call you a pastor?
Rarely, not often. I guess I always describe myself as I'm a pastor without the pastoral title.
Okay.
So.
And one of the things we say often in worship, and by we I mean me, but some other people have started to adopt it. We need to probably figure out if that's good or bad. But one of the things I'll always say is one of the pastors here. Yeah. If you ask anyone at Fusion who our pastors are, I doubt they'd give you the same answer.
Because I think Brandon Vetter used to say that. I think he still says it at his current church. Right. So, last question. No, I got another one I penciled in. So, assume, Taryn, you get your degree, the bishop lays his hand on your head, Steve, the bishop calls, they offer you a full-time appointment somewhere different. What would you take from what you've learned at Fusion, and how would you apply that? I mean, Steve, you've been through it where you led in unhealthy ways in the past, and this is so common. I mean, when I look at the pastors, I talked to a retired pastor the other day, and he says, you know what, I sacrificed my family, and you just can't get that back, to go to stuff like education committee meetings, to go to trustees meetings, stuff that people would have told him, don't go to, go be with your family. So what have you learned through this whole thing that would help you lead in a healthy way in a full-time pastoral position?
That's tricky, because I think through this I've really rediscovered that full-time pastoral positions as they're currently arranged is not for me. Yeah. So I would
avoid it.
I would.
But you took the oath. The bishop touched your head.
You
got to go where he tells you.
That's a different podcast. And we'll see where things are by the time this airs. But I'm pretty sure this type of scenario is what either official or unofficial is my calling. If I was going to be appointed in another situation like this, I would hope that I've learned ways to help Taryn, and whatever the equivalent of Taryn is in any other place, how to help those initial months go better now that I have some experience under my belt. But, there's some battles I think we could have missed, but not all of them.
Yeah.
So, how about you, Taryn?
What have I learned?
Yeah.
That wasn't exactly the question.
What was the question?
If you were to become a full-time pastor of a church, kind of you are, but I mean, these full-time senior pastor... Okay, if you were at a different church besides Fusion, appointed, what would you take that you learned here that would not be what a traditional pastor would normally have done that in your experience to serve in a more healthy way?
That's a hard question.
It's the kind of Oprah would spring on us. That's Jeff right there. He's a hard hitter.
I think that I've learned the importance of drawing as many people into the circle as possible, to equipping them to lead, because even in this scenario, one way that sometimes in our weaker moments, this scenario of quarter-time pastor and full-time lay leader works is I just become the full-time pastor, and it's tempting for me to be the one to miss the evenings that I could be at home, or because I end up going to all the committee meetings and the other things like that. And so the importance of continuing to train your congregation to be okay if there is not necessarily a pastor at every meeting or a leadership figure at every meeting that is a staff person, to empower those lay leaders that aren't necessarily on staff or being paid to do this, to lead things and to do them well without a staff or a pastoral staff person there. Basically to just continue to empower other people in the congregation to take leadership responsibilities, because otherwise what will happen is it will just get dumped on the person that is full-time, whether or not they are a pastor or not. So I guess that's the thing that I've taken away the most is also just the importance of making sure that you are training and raising up solid leaders in your congregation. And delegating well. And also knowing that comes with a lot of administrative duties. So personally for me, I have more of a knack for administrative duties, but it's not something that I find fun. Like, it's very exhausting. And so this role has kind of lent itself to a lot of administrative things. And so one of the things that we're currently pressing into is like, okay, this job takes a lot of administration, especially when you're trying to coordinate a lot of people and communicate a lot of things. So how can I do what I feel like God has created me to do while also do what the church needs me to do at this time? So that's kind of the question.
So how are you figuring that out? I mean, I face that myself. I mean, I like to go out. I'm going to be preaching at Fusion next week. I like working with churches. My title is the Director of Finance and Administration. I really don't like administration. I got into it because I like accounting and I like working with churches. So,
well, maybe we'll have it figured out by the time this airs in June.
No, we won't. So I was hoping you had it figured out because...
No, I mean, I currently the step that I feel like I'm on is figuring out, okay, what am I passionate about? What did I feel like God called me into ministry to do? And then... I think what it's probably going to take is it's going to take people that I trust around me to be able to, if I can give them those things. This is what I feel passionate about. This is what I feel like God has called me to do. But I feel stuck. These are the things I feel like have to get done. So help me find a way to figure out how to get these things done other ways so that I can do a few more things that I feel passionate about.
But that was one of the things, too, that I think we're getting the hang of now. A little bit. I mean, one of the things was something I was going to do for, hour and a half, including prep time, 2 hours maybe a week. A new thing we were going to try with a small group. And I think the awareness that might be a good thing to try to replace some of Taryn's hours or from a spiritual discipling angle.
Yeah. Well, okay, now then we have to figure out who's going to take whatever I do in that 2 hours.
No, that's just...
That's the part of the conversation that we haven't talked about yet, is I'm taking this thing that's going to be 2 hours a week. What's going to go now?
What's going to go? Well, and it's all a trade-off. I mean, I look at all your part-time people. They're all doing probably something they really enjoy for the most part. They don't get a lot of the extra baggage, administrative stuff. They might get a little bit, but not much.
That's not why they got into it, that's for sure.
That's one of the beauties of the part-time person, because they only get the best part. For me, I'm working on this. I haven't figured it out. I'm 40 years old. I should have. But I wrote it on a piece of paper. I started calendaring it into my system. So the best part of my day, I think, well, let's do what I feel I could contribute most to the world on. These are the top things. And then administration could have kind of my crappy part of my day. So, that time after lunch when you're sleepy, I'll administrate then. So I don't know, but yeah, it's a struggle. Also,
when this interview is taking place.
I don't know. Anybody have any last words? Otherwise, all right. Father God, thank you for Steve, Taryn. Thank you for Fusion Church and the willingness, or I don't even know if it's willingness to go down this path that you're leading them. Father God, I pray for just what was shared today, that it would that you would use it in people's lives, in pastors' lives, in churches' lives, just to be able to reach more people and do it in a healthy way. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Well, Sherry, amidst the laughs, there were a lot of good nuggets that jumped out for me. One was just that the importance of trusting each other as leadership. And, when you're navigating new waters, trying new things, you really need to trust one another. And so to hear Steve and Taryn talk about that, and obviously I know from personal experience in the ways that they work together, the trust and respect that they have for each other goes a long way to helping, navigating when things aren't sort of a clear cut, this is the way it's done and has always been done and should always be done.
Right. And I think it's just looking at ministry differently. And, they mentioned that there were 400 to 450 people that are part of Fusion now. And each one of those individuals have their image in their mind of what a pastor is, or who a pastor is, or who a pastor should be, or what a pastor should be doing. So if you take one individual, or in this case, two people that are doing ministry, and you have 400 people looking at you differently and having different expectations. And I think we hear that a lot in many of our settings. I think that Taryn and Steve have worked together wonderfully to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is, having a clear sense of a vision, but also communicating that with each other and with their leaders, and continuing to communicate that and clarify it. I anticipate, and, they talked about that in some ways of, in the future, we'll see a lot of different ministry models and the way it's done for a variety of reasons. The situation at Fusion may be unique because of the college campus situation in that constituency, but churches everywhere are thinking of new models of ministry and how they do staffing of a church. And so when you bring that in, you need to be able to over communicate and constantly be able to clarify and re-clarify expectations.
I think the other thing that I appreciated with the conversation, that Steve and Taryn have appreciation for each of their own styles too, because Steve's style is a little more laid back, and, he communicates and learns from visiting and communicating with people and understanding it that way. And it sounded as if Taryn is more systematic and likes to have things laid out, and to be able to understand each one of them and where they're at, rather than trying to make each one of them more like them. I thought it was wonderful that they could appreciate each other's personalities.
Yeah. And that way of the importance of raising up and equipping other people, but I'm sure communicating with them and then releasing, they talked about how having a clear sense of who's talking to who, or who's taking this piece, because people won't, the congregation won't always, follow what you know. And so to have a clear sense of, okay, I'm taking the lead on this responsibility, or talking with this person, or following up on this. So, and then valuing and not kind of stepping over each other inadvertently in that way. And that can be a learning process, I'm sure.
Exactly.
I'm sure.
But I bet the people in the congregation appreciate that they are allowing each other to follow up, and they're not getting two calls.
Yeah.
And because if they do appreciate the styles of each other, and they don't have to have that follow up behind the action already taken. So anyway, I'm sure that's an appreciation.
Yeah. Well, I think, we're glad you joined us today, and we hope that you found some things in this conversation that have you thinking about ministry, and maybe whether you are a pastor or a layperson listening to this, thinking about how God might be calling you to lead in new and different ways. And if you'd like to visit with someone about that, I'm sure either Taryn or Steve would be available, but also to call into the conference and foundation offices. We would love to support you in discerning how God might be calling you and different ways that you can be equipped to lead in ministry as we do ministry together in making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
Thank you for being part of the Vital Connection. Join us next time as we seek to do ministry together.